Breaking news right now, the central government has allowed an import of a quantity of 20 lakh metric ton each of crude soyabean oil and crude sunflower oil per year for a period of 2 years at nil rate of customs duty and agricultural infrastructure and development cess. This will provide significant relief to consumers. My colleague Meghna joins in with more details. Meghna, you reported earlier in the day on how the government was expected to actually give some relief on edible oils. Is this what we are seeing in action now?
Yes, that's right. The action has come quite soon. The government was considering doing away with this agricultural infrastructure and development cess that the notification has just come. So the government is allowing now import of 20 lakh metric ton each of crude soyabean oil and crude sunflower oil for 2 years. So that is the notification that has just come, and this will be at nil customs duty and agricultural infrastructure and development cess. Now, the basic customs duty that we already know on the crude edible oil is exempted till September 30th, 2022. But now this notification has made it further for 2 years for this entire 20 lakh metric ton of both crude soyabean and sunflower oil. Now, this is definitely expected to give some relief because agricultural infrastructure cess has also been done away with for this quantity. In the past 1 year, in fact, we have seen edible oil prices rise 30%. So that is a huge inflationary thing that we have seen in edible oil. And this notification with such urgency definitely comes in view of the rising inflation. We saw the last CPI numbers that had come. They were almost
Meghna, we have reported earlier, and there were newswire reports today, that there may be a cap on the amount of sugar that we export. This action on some segments of edible oils. Are we expecting more steps in the coming days?
Yes, definitely. So the notification on, in fact, putting a limit on the export of sugar also is expected to be very soon, what the sources are confirming. In fact, the notification might come as early as tomorrow. So that also the government is trying to keep in check the inflationary demand. In fact, the sugar production, though, despite this year, has been a record high of 355 lakh ton. But just to keep the inflation under check and the government does not want to leave any scope of inflation even on the sugar stock. So that is why this limit is expected to come in from tomorrow onward when the notification is issued, because already 80 lakh metric ton of sugar has been exported. So 100 lakh ton will be the limit. That is what the sources are confirming to us. So government is basically doing a multi-pronged approach on the commodities, on the sugar, on the edible oil, and we saw the excise duty cut as well recently. So basically it is trying to tackle the inflation on all fronts.
Now, to speak on the impact of these moves, will it really move the needle as in terms of controlling inflation? I'm joined now by Mythili Bhusnurmath, consulting editor, ET Now, and Madan Sabnavis, chief economist, Bank of Baroda, also with us on the show. Great to have both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Madan, let me begin by getting your take on some of these moves which are being reported. We're, of course, waiting for the formal announcements on them, but the intent and direction seems clear that we need to curb inflation at all costs.
Absolutely. I think that is what we have seen from both the RBI action as well as the measures which the government announced a couple of days back, and what you have mentioned are likely on the anvil. And the thing is that the intent is there to lower the rate of inflation. But we should remember one thing, that inflation is a global phenomenon. So we are talking of 8% inflation even in the Western countries. And whatever the government does right now, what it's already done, I think there will definitely be a reduction in the inflation rate. But to think that these measures on their own will be able to bring inflation to that 4 to 5% range, I don't think that's something which will happen. So today, if you are ruling it somewhere close to say 8%, maybe we can go down by 0.5%, maybe 0.75% if all these measures are invoked and they work out the way in which it has been designed. But I do not think that it can actually bring down inflation, because if things were so easy, I think almost all governments across the world would have done something to make sure that inflation comes down to lower levels.
Mythili, your take in terms of what steps have been taken so far. Now, after Saturday's cuts, the assessment was that this will impact or reduce inflation by about 20 to 40 bips. Do you think that the current moves will add to this figure significantly?
While it's good that government is trying its best to cool prices, but we must understand that inflation, what is it caused by? Today, inflation all over the world, I mean, including in India, has been caused by excess liquidity. Now, whatever the government does, you cannot do something that the RBI should have done. The RBI was way behind the curve, and today we are paying the price for that. So when government does these things like cuts export tax, there's import duties on petrol and diesel, just remember that even if inflation does come down momentarily, there is a cost. What is the cost? That the government's fiscal deficit rises. When the government's fiscal deficit rises, it has to borrow more, interest rates will go up. So the basic problem arose that government cannot fight RBI's battles, just as RBI could not fight government battles. So in the past, the RBI was persistently trying to push growth by keeping monetary policy excessively loose. As a result of which, today we are in the sorry state that we are, with inflation almost in runaway inflation and growth not very much better. So the problem really arose because the RBI was trying to fight the government's battles with little or no success and with grave consequences. And now the government is trying to fight the RBI's battles. The problem has been caused essentially because of excess liquidity. Whatever the cause, you may say it's because of supply disruptions. If indeed it is supply disruptions, then why is RBI raising interest costs now? If it feels that in the past, supply disruptions could not be tackled by interest rate hikes, today it is doing precisely that. So there is a contradiction in RBI's actions. So the basic problem is because of excess liquidity. Unfortunately, though we compare with other countries, let us remember that in the US and in the EU, UK, inflation is a relatively new phenomenon. Whereas we have had high inflation from the year FY21. So it is not a new inflation, new phenomenon for us, number one. Number two, inflation, we have almost a quarter to little over 20-25% of the population below poverty line. Inflation hurts them the most. The advanced countries don't have these kind of numbers. So I think when you talk, we must not, what is sauce for the goose is not sauce for the gander. So today we are paying the price for RBI's excessively loose monetary policy for having been behind the curve. Government can at best, apply some balm, but we will have to live through this pain. And all government can do is try and ease the pain for those who are hurt the most, the poor.
I just wanted to come in on the point that you made about how 25% of our population is below poverty line. That's the figure you talked about, Mythili, and how food inflation can really hurt. So the counter that comes in, or a point of view that comes in on that, is look at the robust food security scheme that we honed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has continued, that has extended. Perhaps that also explains the kind of moves that we're reporting today, attempts at quelling the prices of sugar or edible oil. Do you think that's the right focus? And do you think that the food security schemes will help buffer this part of the population?
Well, certainly that's perhaps the only thing the government can do. But as I said, there is a price to be paid for this.
Yeah.
For the food security scheme that the government has done, the cutting of the excise duty, what is happening? Government's expenditure is rising at a time when we've seen RBI dividend to the government come in perhaps at almost at a 10-year low, 30,000 crores as against 99,000 crores last year. So when government's revenue, fortunately, tax revenue has held up. But let us remember that tax revenue is a function of growth. And if the economy is not going to grow as well as we envisage, your disinvestment revenue is not going to be as good as what it was, then you are going to see your fiscal deficit bloom. As a result, you are going to find higher interest costs. So I said the basic problem is because of excess liquidity. RBI is now trying very hard, but monetary policy acts with a long lag. So all that the government can do is try and ease the pain, not for people like you or I, who don't have to worry about our next meal, but for the vast numbers of poor in the country who are going to feel the pinch and are going to get hurt where it hurts them most, in their stomach.
Madan, let me come to the point of impact. Mythili spoke about the fiscal deficit widening, possibly missing its targets for this year. Is that something that you're concerned about? And also, if I may add, what are the next steps, do you think, that should be or could be taken in this fight against inflation?
If we look at India's fiscal deficit, I think we have seen in the last couple of years, notwithstanding wherever we think there are slippages in terms of disinvestment or in terms of higher expenditures being reckoned on certain items, like here we're talking of food or fertilizer subsidy being given. At the end of the day, the government somehow manages to get the fiscal deficit ratio within the range. So even yesterday, I think it was interesting that the governor of RBI in one of the interviews, he had actually said that he does expect that the fiscal deficit ratio of 6.4% will be maintained, because while there are certain expenditures which have gone up, there will be certain things which will be cut, maybe not capex, but somewhere else they will cut corners. And even in terms of revenue, we've always seen the kind of buoyancy which even I never expected in the GST collections. We see certain positive things coming up there. So while Mythili said definitely the 30,000 crores which RBI is passing on definitely means that there's another thing of 70,000 crores which they should have gotten like what they got last year. There will be gaps, but to my mind, there will be some kind of a slippage in the fiscal deficit, but something which can be managed. And we have seen what the government has been doing is they're not going in for market borrowings. They're drawing down from the NSS. So therefore, as far as the market is concerned, you still see that there is surplus liquidity and there's no pressure which is coming from that side. Now, the interesting part is that even in the last couple of years where we had surplus liquidity, the government chose not to come to the market and borrow. You drew down from the NSSO. So I think there is some kind of a plan there to make sure as far as the borrowings is concerned in the market, you are keeping it range bound within what is there in the budget. And the rest of it is being made up from other sources. So the fiscal may not really be a major problem. And I think even if the fiscal deficit slips, I think in these kind of conditions, it is necessary for the government to spend the money where they are spending. I think that's a very progressive move, which I think it provides a lot of solace to a large section of the population, which, as we all agreed, require help from the government.
No, so then let's come to the second question, and I had clubbed both together, but the second part is important as well, Madan. What next? What more do you think that they can do? Because moves like limiting the export of sugar and what we did with wheat earlier, raises questions around the world. Now, there will be questions of whether this will impact global food security, and that pressure will also prevail on India not to curb exports beyond a point.
See, ideologically, I'm against putting any kind of bans on exports, because just a week back, we were complaining that Indonesia was putting a ban on export of palm oil, and then we turn around and say that we are putting a ban on wheat. So I'm quite sure every country will have some kind of a justification for putting any kind of an export ban. But I think that hopefully this will be a short-term measure, but this thing we have seen in things like wheat and sugar, even in the past, that there have been bans put on exports. So ideally, bans are not something which I would be in favor of, but I really don't know, in this kind of a situation, it could probably be justified. Now, what more can the government do? You can't keep cutting excise duties and other cesses on different products. It may provide some kind of a marginal relief. And as I told you in the beginning, maybe we could bring down inflation by 0.1, 0.2 basis percent, but we will definitely not be able to roll back inflation on account of these measures from 8% to 7%. That won't happen.
Mythili, if I can just come in over there.
Yes, please. I was coming to you for your take, Mythili. Yeah.
On the issue of bans, it might sound very nice to say, yes, we criticize other countries when they impose a ban, but let's not forget that every country acts in its own interest. So as far as other countries every country pontificates to the others and does something quite different when it comes to itself. On the issue of wheat ban, it is not that we should give a damn about what the rest of the world says. The problem is that when we impose a wheat ban, it hurts our farmers. Yeah. Let's be very clear that we had promised doubling of farm income. Now, the moment prices of farm products go up, immediately we start putting the consumer first and don't allow the farmer to get the benefit of the higher prices. So my quarrel is not with the wheat ban, what any other country says. Why should you bother? Every country does whatever suits itself. My problem is that when you have these kind of wheat bans, it hurts our farmers, the Indian farmers. So that is what I'm against.
Yeah, but also, Mythili, I wanted to come to you on the point of what next and what more can be done. Because, and this is what I asked you first, what is going to be the quantum of impact of measures taken so far? And there are limitations. All of these things will impact with a lag. So in terms of immediate succor to at least some sections of society, do you think things like DBT need to be doubled down upon?
Well, as I said, see, inflation hurts the poor the hardest. So you really need to have much more focused support to the poorer classes. Do whatever you can to ease the pain. And this is going to make me very unpopular with your viewers, Tamanna. But given the way that the government's fiscal deficit is going to increase, government should seriously think in terms of imposing an additional tax. Maybe we never had a COVID tax. Many countries had a COVID tax. But if you look at our corporate tax rates, you look at our maximum tax rate, look at our tax to GDP ratio. Why don't the better off people agree to get taxed a little bit more. In the US, in Europe, you hear the very rich say that, look, we are willing to pay more tax. Of course, you must ask questions, is this tax revenue being used for the right purposes? So as I said, I'm going to be very unpopular with your viewers, none of who is hungry, none of who is in the poor. But I do seriously think that when the country is going through a crunch like this,
on petrol and diesel, Mythili, there was
better off.
No, but okay, I understand your point, but I'll get Madan on it. Just there was a COVID cess which some states imposed, and there was a COVID cess on petrol and diesel as well.
Not on income tax. Not on income tax. Not on corporate tax.
Some may argue that if you increase tax rates, you're going to then cut things like discretionary spends, and you will have an overall chilling effect on growth, on investment, and on that longer virtuous cycle.
Can I come in on that?
Yes, the question's to you, ma'am.
Yeah. See, let us be very clear. It's not the rich who spend. The rich spend on air conditioners, BMWs, Jaguars. It is the poor who spend on mass consumption items. If today many of our factories are functioning below, full capacity and way below 60%, 70%, it's because the poor who consume, they are the ones who don't have the income to consume. So if you kind of tax the rich more, it's not really going to affect your consumption. So the fact remains that ultimately you need private investment to come in, led by government investment. Government investment, that is capex, must not get cut because government doesn't have enough revenue. So it's important to protect government revenue if necessary. As I said, if necessary. Ideally, disinvestment, yes, we should pursue it better.
Yes.
Government has done well with LIC. Whatever you may say about the post-listing price, whatever you may say Air India, it is a significant move. One must give credit where it is due. So disinvestment can try and asset monetization, but at the same time, I would not be averse, and I think none of us who are in the better off parts of the country should be averse to paying a little bit higher tax. Look at the kind of money people have made from the stock market. Why don't we tax those who have got stock?
Wow, you're really going to be unpopular with our viewers.
You won't call me again, Tamanna.
No, of course, I always will. We want to represent all views, and all views should be listened to, undoubtedly. But Madan, you want to come in on that, on this debate?
I would also like to add to what Mythili is saying. We also need to increase the corporate tax rate, because we keep lowering it. The whole idea is that you invest more. In the last 10 years, we've seen investment has not taken place. So I think even in terms of the corporate tax rate, tax on the wealthy people or the richer people, I think that's definitely something which is called for. But I'm also not against the idea of also running a higher fiscal deficit in this kind of a respect. Maybe another 0.5% of GDP may not really may be bad under these conditions.
All right, so a lot to mull over there. But the fact is, and the direction is clear, that the fight against inflation will continue. We saw one set of big moves last Saturday. We're reporting on more that can come, and we'll be tracking this space very, very carefully. Thank you so much, Mythili and Madan.